In the early hours of March 18th, 1990, two men disguised as police officers enter the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Within 81 minutes, 13 paintings valued at $500 million were stolen. The unidentified thieves, along with the paintings, were never seen again. Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Arcane Archives podcast. My name is Cody and I am very excited to be bringing this weekly podcast to all of you where we talk about things such as unsolved crime, the paranormal, cryptids, secret societies, and basically everything in between. Before we continue with this week's episode, please feel free to check me out on any other podcast platform, my YouTube channel, and my Twitter account, all with the same name. Just so if there is any visual aspect to the episodes that we will be talking about, you can go see and have a better understanding of what the topic is. With that being said, let's break down the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. Let's start off with a little bit of background. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is located in Boston, Massachusetts, having been open to the public since January 1st of 1903. The museum itself holds more than 7,500 paintings. It has sculptures, furniture, textiles, silver, ceramics, 3,000 rare books, and 7,000 archival objects from places such as ancient Rome, medieval Europe, the Renaissance Italy, Asia, the Islamic world, and 19th century France and America. I won't go too much into detail about Isabella, the creator of the museum, but there are a couple things I'd like to mention. Isabella was born into a well-off family which helped her build the museum and buy the art that she put on display there. At the time of the museum's opening, this was one of the first and finest privately owned art collections open to the public. Now, I don't really know if this was pertaining to all of the world or if this was specifically here in the US. Definitely at least the US. Collecting up until her death, Isabella amassed a huge fortune, as I mentioned earlier with all those lists. If the 13 art pieces we're about to talk about equate to $500 to some say $600 million, I'll let you guess what her total collection of almost 20,000 items would be worth today. Let's talk about the heist. On March 18th, 1990, at 1:24 a.m., these two thieves disguised as police officers approached the outside museum doors. Rick Abbott, who was 23 years old, and Randy Heston, who was 25 years old, were the two guards running the shift that night. I'd like to say Randy Heston was quite the unlucky guard because this was actually his first graveyard shift at the museum. Definitely a way to start things off. The thieves, disguised as the police officers, said they were responding to a disturbance in the area. One thing to keep in mind though is that this was technically against museum protocol, but if I were in the minds of the security guards, I figured that the claims that they made sense. It was St. Patrick's Day, and you're not really expecting these police officers to actually be thieves in disguise. So I'm sure all of this combined, they were okay with letting them in, just having them hurry and do their thing. So I don't really put blame on the security guards, but technically was against protocol. With that being said, we don't really know if the thieves planned to rob the museum on St. Patrick's Day to help convince the security of the fake call, but even if it was or wasn't, it definitely helped them get inside. Once they entered, the thieves immediately overtook the guards, bound them up with duct tape, covered both their eyes and mouths, took them down to the museum basement, handcuffed them, and the thieves were free to go about the museum as they wished. Now to give you a quick visual of this museum has multiple floors to it, and on each floor there are different amounts of galleries and rooms. The main three that we're going to be talking about with this heist are the Dutch Room, the Blue Room, and the Short Gallery. The most well-known pieces of art that were stolen this night were out of the Dutch Room, which is found on the second floor. Artwork found from this room includes Rembrandt's Christ in the Storm of the Sea of Galilee and A Lady of Gentlemen in Black, Vermeer's The Concert, and Flink's Landscape with the Obelisk. The short room, which is located on the same floor as the Dutch room, had multiple items taken from it, and the blue room, located on the first floor, had Manette's Ches Tortoni taken from it. I guess I should have said at the beginning of the episode, I apologize for any improper pronunciation of paintings or artists. Definitely not the person who's an expert in that field. So in total, 13 pieces of art were taken from the museum, and after taking separate trips to what was presumably their car, the last thief left at 2:45 a.m. after being in the museum for only a total of 81 minutes. Okay, so let's take a quick step back here. I'm sure you may be wondering, I know I was when I was doing research, how do we know all of this information even though the two security guards were tied up? There was no one else that had any sort of information or eyewitness account of these thieves. So there were motion sensors that were critical in the tracking of these thieves during this night. Because of these motion sensors, there were also timestamps given to each of the rooms, and because of this, we have basically a crystal clear timeline of what these thieves were doing, at what time, and in what room. Because of the art pieces taken and how much they were worth, we can assume that the thieves did some amount of research just to see which paintings to steal, which is kind of odd. Something to include is that the most valuable piece of art, called the Rape of Europa, was just left untouched. And not really sure why. Don't know if it was any more difficult to take than the others, but that one was left. Based on FBI investigation and also just visual knowledge, we can see that the thieves would take a box cutter or something to cut the paintings out of the frame, make it a lot easier for them to take out, and just leave the frame there. Now, when all this was done, on the way out, the thieves, whether they knew it or not, forgot to remove the data regarding the movements from the dot matrix printer at the museum. I just mentioned all the timestamps. This would be shipped to this printer, and you are able to reprint information. And so that's something that was able to be done after the thieves had left and the security guards had been freed. They went to this printer, they printed out another report, and this is how we have all the information. Ultimately, this really didn't matter because the information doesn't tell us about the thieves' motives or what they had planned after committing the heist. Obviously, we can assume that the motive was money, but we really can't say for certain because we obviously don't know where they are. Another big factor that helped aid the thieves was the lack of security footage. The thieves disabled the security footage, giving them free range of the museum. There does actually exist footage of the rear of the museum exactly one day before the heist. In the footage, we can see someone pulling up and then eventually driving away from the front door. The description of this car actually matches a similar vehicle reported parked outside of the museum a couple days even earlier before the robbery. Fast forward a couple of hours, the guards were eventually found in the basement 5.5 hours later, still handcuffed with tape over their eyes and mouths. In my research, I really couldn't find if either of these guards continued to work for this job after this heist, but to be honest, I really wouldn't blame them if they just decided to peace out and start doing something else. If I was in their shoes, I probably would do the same. So with the thieves gone and the security guards rescued, the FBI investigation immediately starts. Walking around the different rooms and the floors, especially where the motion sensor showed where the thieves were at, it was then discovered that these 13 paintings had gone missing. There seems to have been other attempts at other pieces of art, with one being left propped up against the wall on the ground. Some people suggest the thieves believed it to be too big or heavy, or that they simply placed it there and forgot about it before making their escape. This doesn't really tie in with the thing I said earlier about them cutting them out with box cutters. I don't know why this one they seem to have left in the frame. Not too sure, but what we do know is that it was propped up against a wall for whatever reason, and that it was still there after the thieves had left. In the end, the rooms entered by the thieves were left a complete mess. Things like broken glass, these trashed frames, these cut fabrics were only parts of the damages done to these rooms. It's up to personal interpretation why they decided to leave it such a mess. They did have almost an hour and a half of completely uninterrupted time. This could be because they didn't really know if more police would show up, or I guess actual police, because they sure weren't real, or if, they just decided to be disrespectful and trash the place. With no real physical evidence, 24 years later, we still really have no idea where or what happened to these paintings, and who these thieves were that disguised themselves as police officers. Jumping ahead from 1990 to 2013, the FBI did make an update stating they believe the paintings had been transported to Connecticut and Philadelphia areas where they believed that the paintings were planning or had already been sold. Since that 2013 update, there really is nothing else that we can talk about. It's been complete radio silence ever since. Now, there are a couple suspects that are worth talking about, and even a connection to the Boston Mafia, which, honestly, now that I'm saying out loud, doesn't really seem too far-fetched. Our first suspect is Rick Abbott. Now, that name may sound familiar to you, and that is because he is one of the 2 guards that had been working that night of the robbery. He was the 23-year-old who had been working security for a while, and by a while, I mean it wasn't his first day like the other guard. There actually is security footage of Rick opening and letting an unidentified man into the museum. Some believe it to be the museum's deputy security chief, but Rick never wavered in his statement that he did not remember opening the door. Sadly enough, Rick Abbott passed away just within the last couple of months of me recording this episode, but he did maintain his innocence up until the end. Our second suspect is Whitney Bulger, who was actually a very powerful crime boss in the Boston area. With his deep ties to the police force, some believe that this was the way that the thieves were able to obtain Boston police officer uniforms. I believe that when someone calls people like Whitney a suspect, it's not because they believe they were literally involved in the heist, they were one of the robbers, but that he helped facilitate and made connections to specific things and was involved generally in the heist. Our third suspect really isn't a suspect, but something that helped continue the case 4 years after it happened. So 4 years after the heist, Anne Hawley, who was the museum director, received what she claimed to be a very credible letter. The letter mentioned the negotiation for returning the 13 pieces of art. With this, the robbers did expect immunity and a payment of $2.6 million for each art piece to be returned, which, quick calculation, is $33.8 million for all 13 pieces. In this letter, there was specific instructions to post a coded message in the Boston Globe newspaper. So Anne did that, and she eventually received a second letter from this anonymous writer. In it, the writer said they had to, quote-unquote, consider their options. That's basically all it said, and that was the last that Anne Hawley ever heard from the writer, and no more letters were ever sent. Our final specific individual subject is Brian McDevitt. Brian was a con man who had been known for impersonating FedEx drivers while also carrying handcuffs and duct tape, of course, similar items used during the robbery. Brian denied any involvement, refused polygraphs, and it was discovered that none of his fingerprints were found at the scene. He did move to California and eventually died in 2004. Our fifth and kind of subject, you could call it, is the Boston Mafia, or the belief that they had a hand in the robbery. The FBI did claim they were making progress in their investigation, stating that the Mafia had taken the art and shipped it to Connecticut and Philadelphia and potentially other places. Along with that information, the FBI did claim that 2 or more of their prime suspects within the Mafia had died, essentially leaving the FBI with little or no trail to follow. So that's a quick rundown of the different suspects that were believed to be associated with the heist. I would like to quickly share my own opinion. This is something I'd like to do in future episodes, just add a little snippet of what I believe or what I think happened, just to, add some more insight. So here's what I believe happened. I believe that the Isabella Stewart Gardner museum heist was actually not part of some giant mafia organization. I believe it was simply 2 guys who took a long time to prepare and execute the heist. I believe they either went to the museum for a long period of time or small amounts of time, and gradually over the years, they just took notes of the art, the different rooms, the layout, the guards, the cameras, basically doing reconnaissance for their future heist. With the information that they gathered over who knows how long, they were able to execute their plan quickly without really any major issues. I believe the reason the art hasn't been sold or discovered may be due to actually a couple of reasons. I believe that the art has already been sold in a very discreet way, maybe sold on the black market, or for some reason they just haven't sold it and they're sitting on it for the 35 years since the heist. Obviously, this is all up to speculation, but feel free to let me know down in the comments, depending on where you're watching this, what you think happened, and let me know of any other things that I missed. Believe it or not, this investigation is still ongoing, and there are ways that you, the listener, can help. If you do have any information regarding the robbery, you can contact the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and provide that information to them. You can reach them at reward@gardnermuseum.org. And of course, please be respectful and only reach out if you do have legitimate information. Well, with all this being said, we have reached the end of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. Hope you all enjoyed this episode and took something away from it. Just a little thing to include here. I really don't know if I want to aim for a specific length of a podcast episode or if I should just play it by ear. We'll see as I continue to post episodes, but let me know if you want to see something specific. I'll repeat again what I said at the beginning, but this podcast is based on unsolved crime, the paranormal, cryptids, secret societies, everything in between. So if you have any suggestions, please reach out to me, whether it's on YouTube, my Twitter account. If you can post comments on your podcasts, please do. I'd love to get some feedback and potentially some future topics. New episodes will be out every Friday, weekly, so you can find me there, find me on my socials like I mentioned. Thank you all so much again, and I'll see you in the next episode.